We're going to spend a little time now working on the collision-related impact of our projectile. But first, in our game demo world here, we're going to do a little resizing of the environment so it looks a little better with the camera and we can observe our impact a little better. So we're going to work on the wall here. And while we're setting up the properties for this mesh, we also want to make sure that its collision properties will do what we want it to. Under collision, we're going to look for generate overlap events. And we're going to set this to true because we're going to be using overlap events with our projectile. All right, so now when we play this, the wall's thinner and you can see the edge and more easily see the, well, kind of. Let's move it a little bit more. Okay, good. We'll slide it back so it's a little, okay, now we can, without even moving or moving very little, we can see the shot go through the wall mesh. Okay, that should work. So now on the BP projectile, we're going to go back and look at our sphere collision. And if we drag this pane open here, we can add an event from this tab. For what we're going to do, we're going to use onComponent begin overlap. We'll be using overlap events, as I mentioned before, about the overlap for the wall mesh. We'll use this for anything that the component overlaps to generate its impact. Okay, so we're going to drag off this. And one of the two things we want to happen is we want on an overlap, which simulates our impact, we want the actor for the projectile to be destroyed, to vanish. In other words, to not show through the wall as it was before. So let's just play and test this real fast. Okay, it's still going through the wall. That means we need to change a setting here. Let's see if we go back to the wall. Let's make sure. Okay, I guess it did not take. So let's open this up. We'll generate overlap events there. See if this works this time. Well, let's save. And we'll play this again. And now I think, there we go. Okay, now it's not going through the wall anymore. Because when it overlaps the wall, it is destroying the projectile actor. All right, so the other thing we want to happen is we want to actually see an impact effect on the wall. So we're going to need a new actor class for this. So we'll put a placeholder spawn actor from class node here. And again, we want to always spawn ignoring collisions. And we're going to use this as a spawn actor class because it makes it a little easier if you want to use the impact anywhere else in the world to spawn that impact on the location of the hit. So to that end, we'll get the actor location at this moment when the overlap event happens. And we'll grab the transform of the actor and we'll make that the spawn location for the impact. And we get a compiler here because we haven't yet chosen a class to spawn. That's understandable. Okay, so to make our blueprint actor for the impact, we're going to right click here, choose blueprint class, and again it will be an actor. We'll just name this BP underscore, we'll go with proj impact. Okay. So we'll open this up and we'll do a little work here with our components. Right now the circle we see is just the symbol for the default scene root, which isn't really that helpful. It just kind of obscures things you want to do, especially when you're doing things very small like sprite graphics. So we are going to add our paper flip book, which will handle the animations of our impact. And we'll add a scene component to get rid of the obscuring default scene root. So I think if I drag this here, yes, and I do make new root, right? Make new root. That will replace it, and there we go. That circles billboard is no longer there obscuring our work. That's better. Okay, so now we're going to go and import some sprites from a different sprite sheet for our impact. So we'll go to the source folder, we'll go to import, and we'll choose this small sprite sheet here for projectile impact. If you recall, we want to first do a sprite action to make it transparent. Yeah, I should rename it. Okay, let's rename it Impact. Impact will be fine. So we want to do a sprite action on it to apply paper 2D texture settings again. That preserves the transparency that's in the original PNG file. Then we want to do sprite actions and extract sprites as before. Although this time when we look at the sprite sheet, we can see that the auto sprite generation extraction has drawn a ton of little yellow squares around everything. That's not good. That will result in hundreds, maybe over 100 sprites probably. This is a good case for us to use the sprite grid because I created the sprite explosion in equally spaced 32 units apart. So we can do 32 cell widths and 32 cell height, and it gives us a nice even separation of the sprites. And we'll rename these with a naming template. So now we have all of our extracted impacts. We're going to select all of these and drag them to our objects folder where we're keeping everything for our objects like the projectile and now the projectile impact. So we're going to grab all of these and make our flipbook by grabbing them all and right-clicking on Make Flipbook. We'll name this Anim Impact. Let's see with Anim Impact, if we double-click on this to open it in the flipbook editor, we see it looks pretty good at the default frame rates and the frame run lengths as well. That should be just fine as it is. So now, in our BP projectile, we can at least choose our BP proj impact, compile and save this. But of course, if we play it now, we see there should be no impact effect. That's right. That is because why? It's because in our projectile impact actor, we haven't yet chosen that flipbook. So if we go to, let's see, if we go to, yes, the BP project impact and go to our paper flipbook, go to our source flipbook, and this time just search for Anim Impact. Double click that, and we'll compile and save this, and we can see our flipbook animating. We'll go to front view lit mode to see it a little more clearly. But there it is. That's how it should appear in game. So now if we hit play, the flipbook should be showing on the projectile impact. There we go. Now when it hits, we see it hit, but we see it looping. That's not what we want. We want it to play once and disappear along with the projectile. So it appears like a more realistic impact that you would expect. So to make this happen, we're going to have to do a little work in the event graph of the projectile impact blueprint. We'll start off with a reference to our paper flipbook sprite. And from here, we're going to have to set some properties on this flipbook just to make sure it doesn't loop. The first we're going to do is set it to not looping. We leave the Boolean set to new looping false. Let's move this up for a little more room. And we're going to set some other things off from this reference to the paper flipbook. We're going to do play from start. So it's not looping. It'll play from the start of the explosion kind of impact effect. Next thing we want to do is we're going to do sort of our makeshift anim notify, sort of only letting the explosion play or end when we want it to. This will be a little bit like what we did before. And here we're going to look at this sprite, frame 6. This will be, we'll use frame 6 for when we want this thing to actually end and destroy itself. So when we get the playback position of frames and it equals 6, we'll do a branch check for that condition when it is true. And then when it is true, well, actually, we want to loop first. I should correct myself here. We want this to continually loop until 6 is reached. So if it's false, with a duration of 0, it's going to loop through. And then when it reaches true finally, it will destroy this impact. So the impact will only exist long enough to play its animation once. So now if we spawn in the world and we press play, we can see that sure enough, it hits the wall and it disappears immediately when it's finished playing its animation. And that's what we want in our projectile impact.